Everyone thought the single dad was homeless, so drag him out, the commissioner snapped. Not a scene, not tonight. A guard reached for his elbow. The man in the worn jacket shifted, placing his daughter behind him. Her small fingers clutched an inhaler bag like it was a life raft. They shoved the maintenance dad out of the transit terminal like trash. Security sneered at his work boots, his worn jacket, and the fact he always sleeps nearby, while the city commissioner watched like it was a victory. The maintenance dad didn't argue. He just tightened his grip on his kid's inhaler bag and walked away calm. Minutes later, the emergency broadcast screamed through the building, and the commissioner's confidence cracked. Because this was never about homelessness. It was about who gets ignored until it's too late. Before I show you the exact moment when the broadcast switched from automated warnings to a single, steady voice giving life-saving instructions. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. He didn't plead, he didn't flare. He just angled his body, a quiet shield, and let their hands push him toward the cold. The guard expected resistance. The commissioner expected humiliation to land like a verdict. Instead, the dad nodded once, as if logging the moment for later, and stepped outside. Caleb Ardent tasted winter air and metal, the kind that lived near rails and brake dust. He guided Iris beneath the service awning where the wind didn't cut as hard, then crouched so her eyes met his. Slow breaths, he murmured. In, hold, out. She tried, shoulders rising too fast. Her asthma wasn't dramatic until it was. He could hear it in the thin catch behind her ribs. Inside the glass doors, Commissioner Roland Varelli, tailored coat, polished smile, donors waiting, watched them like they were clutter on her lobby floor. She didn't see the maintenance badge tucked under his jacket. She saw scuffed shoes, a backpack with a patched seam, the shadow of exhaustion. To her, that meant liability. His mind noted details anyway. The terminal's HVAC ran in 3 zones. The donor event had extra lighting and temporary heaters. Load patterns would shift. He told himself to stop. He told himself he was just night maintenance now. Filters, leaks, broken tiles. The story he lived in private was Iris first. Always. He'd packed her inhaler bag like a ritual. Inhaler, spacer, emergency note, and the little stuffed fox she insisted helped. He felt her fingers tighten around the strap and knew she was watching him, searching his face for the moment adults failed her. "Daddy," she whispered, "why's she mad?" "Because she's scared of anything she can't control," he said, and hated that the truth sounded like a lesson. In the control room above the concourse, Mila Torres watched the wall of monitors breathe in steady green. An amber blink appeared on the edge of the grid and steadied. She leaned closer. "Converter hub 3 just spiked," she said. An engineer shrugged without looking up. "It'll settle. Extra staging downstairs." "Systems don't settle on hope," Mila muttered. Downstairs, Varelli adjusted her earpiece for the cameras. "Tonight is about safety and reliability," she announced, voice bright as glass. The chandelier trembled. So slightly the donors only blinked. Varelli kept smiling. "Our network runs like—" The lights dipped once, a soft wink, and returned. "Clockwork," she finished, unaware her metaphor had already cracked. He felt the dip through his boots, a faint stutter under the concrete. Pattern recognition stirred, old and unwelcome. Load shift, relay delay, a converter overheating. He hadn't wanted to remember the years when his name opened executive doors. Iris inhaled and stopped halfway, eyes widening. "My chest feels tight." He moved instantly, calm on the outside, counting on the inside. "Okay, sit, shoulders down." He kept his hand on the inhaler bag, feeling the warmth, promising himself he'd get her air no matter who watched. A test chirp sounded somewhere inside, one small electronic peep, then cut off, and most people didn't even turn their heads. Mila's console flashed amber again, then red. A line of text scrolled, "Backup route fail." Her chair scraped as she stood. That shouldn't be possible. The monitors hiccuped. The low hum of the terminal deepened into a strained whine, like steel trying not to scream. The emergency broadcast detonated across every speaker, flat and merciless. "Attention, system failure. Please remain calm. Trains are stopped. Ventilation is limited." The lobby froze. Donors clutched champagne flutes that suddenly looked ridiculous. Security radios crackled with confusion. Commissioner Varelli's smile collapsed into a blank, startled line. He rose with iris tucked close, eyes tracking vents, doors, the flow of bodies. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a father who couldn't afford to be wrong. The emergency broadcast repeated, louder this time, flattening every private conversation into the same metallic command. "Attention, system failure. Trains are stopped. Ventilation is limited." Inside the glass doors, panic moved like a ripple under skin. A woman dropped her phone. Someone laughed nervously, the sound too sharp to be sane. The donors turned toward Commissioner Varelli as if she could physically hold the ceiling in place. She lifted both hands. "Everyone remain calm. This is a temporary interruption." Temporary, the word irritated him. Caleb felt the air shift again, subtle, but wrong. The intake fans weren't cycling properly. He could almost map the system in his head. Zone A pulling too hard, Zone C starving. Converter Hub 3 was overloading, which meant the automated reroute should have kicked in already. Should have. Iris pressed against him. "Daddy, it's stuffy." He crouched, unsnapping the inhaler bag. Slow breath. "We're ahead of it, okay? We're ahead." But he wasn't ahead, not yet. Through the glass, he saw Mila sprint from the control corridor toward the commissioner, tablet clutched to her chest. The screen reflected red warnings like a wound. "Backup route failed," Mila said, breath thin. The redundancy didn't initialize. Varelli's jaw tightened. "Then initialize it." "It's not responding." The broadcast shifted tone, the system voice flattening further. "Underground trains are currently stalled. Passengers should remain in place." Underground. Caleb's stomach dropped. Limited ventilation plus stalled trains meant rising carbon dioxide. In older cars, even worse. He stepped back inside before security could think to stop him. No one noticed now. Crisis erased social boundaries faster than compassion ever could. He moved toward the side corridor leading to maintenance access. The smell of heated wiring brushed his nose, faint, acrid. "Sir," a guard started. He didn't slow. "Converter Hub 3 is pulling uneven load," he said evenly. "If the reroute didn't trigger, you've got a sequencing fault." The guard blinked. "You can't just—" "Call control," Caleb cut in, voice calm but edged in steel. "Ask if Hub 3 is spiking at 30% over baseline." The guard hesitated, then lifted his radio. Static crackled. A beat later, Mila's voice burst through, strained. "Hub 3 is at 32% over. How did you—" Caleb exhaled once. There it was. Varelli turned sharply. Recognition didn't cross her face. Only irritation that the man she'd dismissed was speaking in numbers she didn't understand. "Who authorized him back inside?" she demanded. No one answered. He met her gaze, steady. "Your redundancy failed because the commissioning sequence was never fully completed. You cut the third phase calibration 2 years ago." Her expression flickered. Not guilt, not yet, just offense. That's speculation, she snapped. It's math, he replied. Another tremor ran through the lighting. The chandeliers dimmed to a sickly yellow. Mila stepped closer, eyes narrowing as she studied him. If I'm wrong, nothing changes, he said. If I'm right, you've got minutes before underground air quality drops below safe threshold. Iris tugged at his sleeve. Daddy? He squeezed her hand without looking away from Mila. Check the commissioning logs for Phase 3 calibration. It'll show incomplete override authorization. Mila hesitated only a second before tapping furiously across her tablet. The broadcast repeated again, louder, as if volume could replace oxygen. Around them, people were filming. Panic always needed an audience. If you're still watching this unfold, make sure you're subscribed. Because what happens next isn't about pride, it's about survival. He didn't say that aloud, but the feeling hung there, thick as the air. Mila's eyes widened. Phase 3 calibration, incomplete. It was flagged as deferred. Caleb nodded once. Deferred means disabled. Varelli's composure cracked at the edges. We deferred non-critical optimization. It wasn't optimization, he said quietly. It was manual reroute authority. Another alert chimed, shrill, insistent. Mila swallowed. Carbon dioxide levels rising in tunnel segments 4 and 6. The words drained color from the commissioner's face. My daughter's train runs through 6, she whispered, almost to herself. Caleb heard it, filed it, didn't react. This wasn't about revenge, it was about airflow. Your automated systems won't fix this, he said. You need a physical reroute, manual load balancing from the secondary corridor junction. Mila looked between them. That access is sealed behind executive clearance. He held Varelli's gaze. Then clear it. The commissioner hesitated, authority colliding with fear. Somewhere deep below, hundreds of passengers were breathing air that was growing thinner by the second. Iris leaned against him again, and he felt the faint wheeze starting in her chest. He didn't look away from the woman who had thrown him out minutes earlier. Decide, he said, voice low but unwavering. For a suspended second, the only sound was the broadcast looping overhead, flattening hope into repetition. Commissioner Varelli stared at him as if the answer might appear on his jacket instead of inside her own fear. Then another alarm shrieked. Longer, sharper. Mila didn't wait for permission. Carbon dioxide in segment 6 just crossed warning threshold, she said, eyes locked on her tablet. Ventilation in that zone isn't cycling at all. Varelli flinched at the word 6. My daughter is on that line, she said, the Polish finally cracking into something human. Caleb felt the shift, not power, but gravity. The crisis had found its center. Manual reroute, he repeated. Secondary corridor junction beneath the executive wing. You need to rebalance load before Hub 3 cascades into 4. Mila's gaze sharpened. How do you know about that junction? He didn't answer the question directly. Because the automated path was designed to fail safe. When it doesn't, you bypass it physically. That access is restricted, Varelli insisted, though the edge had dulled. And oxygen is non-negotiable, he replied. Another tremor rolled through the floor, stronger this time. A few ceiling tiles rattled. Somewhere in the distance a child started crying. The sound cut through him in a way alarms never could. Iris pressed closer, breath shallow. He felt the faint vibration in her chest when she inhaled. Daddy. It's getting harder. He knelt instantly, steady hands pulling the inhaler from her bag. Okay, one slow puff. Deep breath after. She obeyed, trusting him the way only children do, without negotiation. He rose again before the commissioner could mistake tenderness for weakness. Mila stepped closer, lowering her voice. If we attempt manual reroute and you're wrong, we could overload the entire grid. If you don't, he said evenly, you'll suffocate the tunnels. The broadcast crackled, glitching for a split second before resuming its mechanical calm. That glitch made his pulse spike. System strain. Control to field units, a voice barked over a nearby radio. Passengers reporting dizziness in Segment 6. Varelli swayed slightly, catching herself on the edge of a podium meant for celebration speeches. Cameras were still rolling. Donors were still filming. Public optics had transformed into public witnesses. Caleb met Mela's eyes. Hub 3 is overheating because the load from temporary event lighting wasn't redistributed. The third phase calibration was meant to account for that. Without it, the system doesn't recognize the imbalance. Her expression shifted from skepticism to calculation. You're speaking like someone who's seen the blueprints, she said quietly. He didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. Time is oxygen. Varelli's voice dropped, stripped of ceremony. What exactly are you proposing? He turned toward the service corridor. There's a manual transfer switch beneath your executive wing. It feeds a secondary converter line that was never integrated into automated protocols. You can reroute ventilation priority through it, if you sequence it manually. And you can do that? Mila asked. He hesitated, not from doubt, but from memory. The corridor she was describing had once required his biometric clearance. Yes, he said finally, if I can reach it. Security guards shifted uneasily, unsure whether to block or follow. The floor shuddered again. Overhead, lights flickered into a dim amber haze. The air felt heavier now, as if the building itself were breathing wrong. CO2 and 6 approaching critical, Mila announced, voice tight. We're losing time. Varelli closed her eyes for half a heartbeat. When she opened them, the arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw. Clear the corridor, she ordered. Escort him. The guards looked startled but moved. Caleb didn't waste a second. He scooped Iris into his arms, feeling her weight settle against his chest. She was old enough to walk, but not through failing air. You're coming with me, he told her softly. Okay, she breathed. They pushed through the restricted doors, alarms echoing behind them. The executive hallway, usually silent and polished, now hummed with strained electricity. As they descended the stairwell toward the lower junction, Mila kept pace, tablet glowing in the dim light. Hub 3 just spiked to 40%, she said. He nodded once. When it hits 50, you'll hear it. Hear what? The system trying not to die. They reached the sealed gate at the bottom landing. A biometric scanner blinked red. Varelli's voice crackled over Mila's radio. Override granted. The gate clicked open. Warm air rolled out to meet them, stagnant, metallic, tinged with heat. Caleb stepped inside the narrow service corridor, Iris still in his arms, and felt the building's pulse through the soles of his boots. He hadn't wanted this battlefield again. But it had come for him anyway. The corridor swallowed them in humming heat and flickering amber light. Metal walls sweated condensation. The air tasted of dust and ozone, heavy enough to press against the back of his throat. Iris tightened her arms around his neck. It smells weird, she whispered. I know, he said quietly. Keep breathing slow. Behind him, Mila keyed into her radio. We're inside the secondary corridor, temperature elevated, Hub 3 now at 43% over baseline. A distant clang echoed through the steel ribs of the structure, sharp, unnatural. Not collapse, strain, he felt it in his teeth. 45, Mila said seconds later, as they moved deeper. Pipes lined the ceiling in thick bundles, painted lines marking pressure levels and flow direction. Most people would see chaos. He saw intention, systems layered over systems, redundancies hidden like secrets. At the end of the narrow passage, a reinforced access panel sat recessed into concrete. Dust clung to its edges, no fresh scuff marks, untouched. "That's it," he said. Mila stared at the panel. "This hasn't been accessed in years." "That's the problem." She hesitated. "If you sequence this wrong, I won't." Confidence didn't come from ego, it came from memory. He could still see the schematic in his head, blue lines crossing like arteries. He had drawn them once. Not alone, but enough to know where they bled. Another tremor shook the corridor. A low groan rolled through the walls like a living thing under stress. 48%, Mila said, breath thinning. CO2 in Tunnel 6 approaching critical. Some passengers are reporting dizziness. His jaw tightened. Iris shifted weakly against him. "Daddy, is it dark down there?" "Yes," he answered honestly, "but we're fixing it." He set her down gently on a crate near the wall. "Stay here. Don't move." She nodded, trusting him with a faith that felt heavier than any steel door. He crouched before the panel and pried it open. Inside, a bank of manual transfer switches and analog gauges waited in silence. Dust coated the handles, a thin layer of neglect. "Hub 3 is about to crest 50, Mila warned. "Listen for it," he said. Then it came. A rising metallic whine. Subtle at first, then sharper, vibrating through the floor like a held breath about to snap. 50%, Mila confirmed. He moved. First switch down, isolating non-essential load. The lights dimmed further, flickering like tired eyes. Second switch, redirect staging power away from the event wing. Somewhere above, decorative lighting surrendered and died. Load dropping 2%, Mila said, surprise threading her voice. He didn't answer. Third switch, manual ventilation priority reroute. The gauge needle trembled violently before sliding left. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a deep mechanical thud pulsed through the corridor, heavy and deliberate. Far below, unseen fans began to turn. CO2 stabilizing in segment 6, Mila breathed, levels holding. He exhaled slowly, but didn't stop. This wasn't complete. It was triage. Hub 3 at 42% and falling, she continued, ventilation cycling back online in affected zones. The whine softened, and losing its sharp edge. In the distance, the emergency broadcast stuttered, its automated tone glitching under new command input. He reached for the final lever. "This will transfer communication control to manual override," he said quietly. "Automated loop will cease." "Do it," Mila replied. He pulled. The corridor fell silent except for the steady, strengthening hum of balanced load. Above them, the broadcast cut mid-sentence. A beat of emptiness. Then a live microphone hiss. In the control room, every camera turned toward the console where manual authority now glowed active. Mila looked at him. "You need to speak." He blinked once, surprised. "You know what they need to hear," she said. Iris watched him from the crate, small chest rising more evenly now. He stepped toward the wall-mounted comm panel, lifted the receiver, and felt the weight of an entire city breathing on the other side. Static crackled. His voice came out steady. "This is manual override. Ventilation systems are stabilizing. Remain in place. Airflow is being restored. Help is on the way." No grand speech, no title attached, just clarity. Below ground, passengers heard a human voice replace the machine. Mila's tablet updated in real time. CO2 decreasing in 6, stabilizing in 4, hub 3 at 38%. He closed his eyes briefly. For the first time since the alarms began, the building felt less like it was dying. Behind them, hurried footsteps approached down the corridor. Commissioner Varelli appeared at the entrance, face pale, hair loosened from its immaculate arrangement. "Jordan's train just reported airflow returning," she said, voice unsteady. "They heard you." He replaced the receiver gently. "This isn't finished," he replied. But for the first time, she didn't look at him like clutter. She looked at him like the only reason her daughter was still breathing. The corridor hummed with a steadier rhythm now, ventilation fans pushing air with renewed purpose. It wasn't victory, it was stabilization, a fragile plateau. Mila's tablet continued streaming data. CO2 levels are dropping across all affected segments. Not fast, but consistently. He nodded once, eyes still scanning the analog gauges. Hub 3 needs to cool another 5% before we reintegrate secondary systems. Commissioner Varelli stepped closer, heels clicking awkwardly against concrete not meant for executive shoes. The heat in the corridor had softened her composure. A sheen of sweat traced her temple. "You said this wasn't finished," she said, not accusing. Asking. "It isn't," he replied. "We rerouted ventilation priority. That bought time. But the converter imbalance will cascade again if we don't recalibrate load sequencing manually." Mila frowned. "That requires access to the commissioning layer." He met her gaze. "The one deferred 2 years ago." Varelli flinched at the reminder. "You're implying this entire failure traces back to that decision." "I'm stating a systems fact," he answered calmly. "Deferred calibration disabled automatic load balancing under stress." Another tremor rippled faintly through the structure, less violent than before, but present. Iris coughed softly from the crate. He crossed to her immediately, kneeling. "How's your chest?" "Better," she said, voice small but steady. "It's cooler." He smiled gently. "That's the fans doing their job." He rose again, protective instinct tightening inside him. Stabilizing the city meant nothing if he lost her. Mila glanced between them. "If we attempt full recalibration now and it fails—" "It won't," he said quietly. "How can you be that sure?" she pressed. "Because I built it." He didn't say the words aloud. Instead, he stepped back toward the open panel and wiped dust from a small metal placard screwed into the interior frame. Under the grime, engraved text caught the light. Mila leaned closer. There it was. Design Authority, C. Ardent. Her breath caught. "You're—" He didn't let her finish. "We don't have time for introductions." But the revelation hung in the air heavier than the heat. And this is the moment most people would rewind and replay, because sometimes the quiet man in work boots wrote the blueprint everyone else ignored. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because what happens next flips more than just a switch. Varelli stared at the placard, color draining from her face. "You designed the redundancy architecture." "Yes." "And your working maintenance?" "Yes." The simplicity of his answers felt louder than any accusation. Another alert pinged on Mila's tablet. "Secondary load drift detected. Hub 4 rising." He turned back to the panel immediately. "We need to manually integrate the dormant secondary converter. It was built as a failsafe for exactly this scenario." Mila shook her head faintly. "That line was never officially activated." "I know," he said. Varelli's voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. "If that system wasn't commissioned—" "It still exists," he replied. "Steel doesn't care about politics." The corridor vibrated again. This time sharper, like a warning growl. Hub 4 at 28% and climbing, Mila said. He reached into the panel and adjusted a smaller dial most would have overlooked. That line feeds auxiliary airflow and communications. If we bring it online gradually, we prevent another cascade. And if we don't? Varelli asked quietly. Your tunnels heat up again, faster. Silence pressed in. Far above them, faint cheers echoed through ductwork as passengers began feeling real air circulate. The building wasn't safe yet, but it wasn't suffocating. He adjusted the first auxiliary switch. The lights flickered but held. Load stabilizing temporarily, Mila said. You're offsetting Hub 4. He continued, movements measured, precise. Not rushed, not dramatic. Varelli watched his hands as if memorizing them. I cut that calibration to preserve budget for expansion, she whispered almost to herself. He didn't look up. Expansion without stability is collapse. Her shoulders sank, not under public pressure now, but under truth. Auxiliary converter ready for gradual integration, Mila reported. He paused before the final lever, glancing once toward Iris. Her breathing was steady. He pulled. A deep, resonant thud rolled through the infrastructure. Heavier than before, but controlled. Mila's screen updated in cascading green. Hub 4 decreasing. Hub 3 steady at 35%. Ventilation fully cycling across all segments. For the first time since the alarms began, no new red indicators appeared. The building exhaled. He stepped back from the panel, chest rising slowly. It wasn't a miracle. It was engineering. And now, for the first time, everyone in that corridor knew exactly who had engineered it. The hum beneath their feet deepened into something stable. No longer a strained whine, but a controlled current flowing where it was meant to. The analog gauges inside the panel settled into green bands. Not perfect, yet, but no longer flirting with disaster. Mila exhaled shakily. All segments reporting ventilation restored. CO2 levels trending down across the board. Above them, the echo of confused panic had shifted into scattered applause. The building wasn't celebrating, it was breathing. Commissioner Varelli stared at the small engraved placard again, then at him. The arrogance that had filled the lobby earlier felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. You resigned, she said quietly. Not a question. Yes. Over the calibration dispute. He met her eyes for a brief moment. Over safety. She absorbed that in silence. A new alert chimed on Mila's tablet. Not red, but amber. Communication arrays partially unstable. Emergency broadcast system still in manual override. He nodded. We need to stabilize the comm loop before handing it back to automation. Otherwise, it'll default to the error script again. Can you fix that from here? Mila asked. No, that requires console access and control. Iris slid off the crate and walked toward him, steadier now. Daddy, are we done? He knelt, brushing hair from her forehead. Almost. She looked up at the commissioner with innocent curiosity. Are you the boss? Varelli blinked, startled by the question. Yes, she answered softly. Iris nodded, as if that explained something complicated. He fixes stuff, she said, pointing at her father. He always fixes stuff. The simplicity of it struck harder than any accusation. He stood again, lifting the receiver from the wall panel one last time. The manual override light still glowed. Control, this is Junction 2, he said into the mic. Prepare to transfer comm stabilization sequence on my mark. Static hissed back, then Mila's own voice from the control room speakers. Ready? He glanced at Varelli. Once we hand this back, automation resumes. If calibration drift remains unresolved long-term, this will happen again. She nodded slowly. It won't. He didn't ask what she meant by that. Transferring in 3, 2, 1. He flipped the comm stabilization toggle. The emergency broadcast system paused, dead air hanging for a breathless second, then resumed with updated messaging. Attention. Systems are stabilizing. Ventilation has been restored. Please remain calm. The tone had shifted, less mechanical, less severe. Mila checked her tablet. Comm loop stable, no regression, automation responding normally. He finally stepped back from the panel completely. The corridor felt cooler now. Not because the temperature had dropped, but because the crisis edge had dulled. Footsteps echoed again from the stairwell. Security personnel, now moving with purpose instead of confusion, filtered into the corridor. Their earlier hostility had dissolved into something like respect. Trains in Segment 6 reporting normal airflow. One guard relayed into his radio. Passengers stable. Varelli closed her eyes briefly. Relief washed across her features, raw and unguarded. "My daughter just texted," she said faintly. "She said the air's back." He nodded once. "Good." There was no triumph in his expression, just confirmation. Mila studied him carefully. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" "That I designed it?" he asked. She nodded. He considered the question for a moment. "Because it didn't matter anymore." "It matters now," she said quietly. Above them, sirens from arriving emergency units echoed faintly through ventilation ducts. Protocol demanded presence, even if the crisis had been neutralized. He walked to Iris and took her hand. "We're heading back up," he said. Varelli straightened slightly, executive posture trying to reassemble itself. "You're not leaving." It wasn't a command this time. He paused. "My daughter needs air and water." "And after that?" she pressed. He looked at her evenly. "After that, we'll see." They began moving toward the stairwell together. Maintenance tech, control supervisor, commissioner, child, no longer divided by polished floors and service corridors. As they climbed, Mila's tablet chimed again with confirmation after confirmation. Green replacing red. Systems synchronizing. Near the top of the stairs, the building gave one final low shudder, not violent, not threatening, just the release of tension. Then it was steady. The worst had passed. But what came next would be harder, because crisis exposes more than broken systems. It exposes people. And upstairs, cameras were still rolling. They stepped out of the stairwell into a lobby that felt like the aftermath of a storm. The chandeliers were dim but steady now. Donors stood in uneasy clusters, phones still raised, capturing every second. Security personnel moved with renewed confidence, radios buzzing with stabilized reports. A murmur rippled through the crowd as they saw who emerged from the restricted corridor. The maintenance man they had watched being thrown out. Commissioner Varelli walked half a step behind him now, not leading. Mila remained at his side, tablet glowing green. Someone near the front whispered, "That's him. That's the guy from before." Another voice, "He was outside." Security pushed him out. The weight of witness settled heavily into the air. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't seek them. His focus remained on Iris, who clutched his hand, her breathing steady but tired. Varelli stepped forward toward the waiting press cluster, but her voice lacked its earlier polish. "The situation has been stabilized," she began, but her gaze flicked back to him. A reporter called out, "Commissioner, what caused the failure?" Another voice, "Who restored the ventilation?" Questions piled fast, sharp and hungry. Mila leaned closer to him. "They're going to want an explanation." "They deserve one," he replied quietly. Varelli hesitated, then did something none of the donors expected. She stepped aside. Not dramatically, not ceremonially, just enough. The cameras shifted toward him instinctively, drawn to the gravity in the room. He felt the shift, but didn't bask in it. This was a load imbalance triggered by incomplete calibration in the redundancy sequence, he said evenly. Ventilation priority was rerouted manually to stabilize affected segments. A reporter blinked. "And you are?" He paused. Names felt irrelevant a moment ago. Now they mattered. "Maintenance," he said first. A beat. "Caleb." The simplicity unsettled the room. Virelli cleared her throat. "Caleb Ardent designed the original redundancy architecture," she said, voice steadying as truth replaced image management. His expertise was instrumental in restoring the system. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Someone near the front whispered, "Designed it?" He kept his tone measured. Systems fail when they're treated as decoration instead of infrastructure. The comment wasn't sharp, but it landed. Virelli absorbed it without flinching. A security officer approached hurriedly. "Commissioner, Tunnel 6 passengers are being escorted off the trains. No serious injuries reported." The lobby exhaled collectively. Iris tugged gently at his sleeve. "Can we go home now?" He knelt again so her voice wouldn't carry to the microphones. "Soon." Virelli stepped closer, lowering her own voice. "Your warning about the deferred calibration." "You were right." He studied her face for arrogance, found none. "That decision almost cost lives," he said calmly. "I know." The admission was quiet, but public enough. Mila spoke softly from his other side. "Full system diagnostic will take hours, but the immediate threat is neutralized." Reporters kept filming, capturing every exchange. This wasn't revenge. It was accountability unfolding in real time. A journalist pushed forward. "Commissioner, will there be an internal investigation?" Virelli didn't hesitate this time. "Yes." "And Mr. Ardent's role going forward?" She glanced at him again. The question hung heavier than the alarms had. "That will depend on whether he's willing to help us rebuild correctly," she answered. He felt Iris squeeze his fingers. He looked down at her, then back at the building. The hum overhead was steady now, balanced, controlled. The structure he had once shaped still held. He didn't need applause. He needed assurance it wouldn't break again. "I'll consult," he said finally, "on one condition." Every camera leaned in. "Safety protocols are restored fully. No more deferred calibrations." Virelli nodded once. "Agreed." The crowd absorbed that exchange in silence. The power imbalance had shifted, not through shouting, not through humiliation returned, but through competence no one could deny. Mila's tablet chimed again. All green. The building stood. And this time, everyone knew exactly who had kept it standing. The lobby buzzed with restrained energy, relief braided with embarrassment. Camera flashes softened as reporters realized the narrative had shifted from catastrophe to reckoning. Caleb remained kneeling beside Iris, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, as if anchoring himself to something that couldn't be spun into headlines. Mila approached quietly. "Control is requesting you upstairs," she said. "They want to review the full system trace while it's still fresh." He rose slowly. "If we're doing this, we do it thoroughly." Virelli stepped closer, voice low enough to keep dignity intact but audible enough for witnesses. "You'll have full access." There it was again, access, the very thing denied to him minutes earlier. He studied her expression. No performance now, just fatigue and something resembling humility. "Fine," he said, "but Iris comes with me." "Of course," she replied. They moved toward the elevators, executive and maintenance walking side by side for the first time. The mirrored walls reflected unlikely symmetry. Polished heels beside worn boots, silk beside work fabric. Inside the lift, silence lingered. Varelli finally spoke. "I didn't recognize your name earlier." "You weren't looking for it," he answered. The doors opened to the control floor. Monitors lined the walls displaying stabilized grids and cooling converters. Engineers turned as he entered, not dismissive now but attentive. Mila gestured toward the central console. "We need to permanently reintegrate the secondary converter into automation. If we leave it manual only, this vulnerability remains." He nodded. "We'll recalibrate the third phase sequence and update the commissioning layer." An engineer hesitated. "That requires board authorization." Varelli didn't pause. "You have it." The room went quiet. He stepped toward the console, Iris perched on a nearby chair with her fox in hand. He began mapping the recalibration steps aloud, methodical, precise. Every instruction corrected a shortcut once taken. "If you're still here watching this unfold," the moment seems to whisper, "subscribe now, because rebuilding trust takes longer than fixing wires." The system trace revealed every deferred note, every delayed upgrade. The architecture told its own story. He input the first recalibration sequence. "Secondary converter integration beginning," Mila announced. Green lines pulsed across the screens, merging into the primary grid. No alarms followed. He continued. "Third phase calibration initializing." The console hummed softly. Processing. An engineer leaned closer. "This was never completed because cost modeling doesn't breathe stale air underground," he replied evenly. No one argued. Varelli watched him work, not as a superior, not as a rival, but as someone witnessing the difference between management and mastery. "Calibration complete," Mila said finally, eyes scanning for irregularities. "Automation now recognizes auxiliary pathways." He exhaled slowly. "This should never have been optional," he murmured. The final integration locked into place with a soft chime. No tremor followed, no flicker, just stability. He stepped back from the console. "It's done," Mila confirmed. Full redundancy restored. The room released a breath it didn't know it was holding. Varelli approached him carefully. "I owe you more than acknowledgement." "You owe the city maintenance that isn't cosmetic," he replied. She accepted that without defensiveness. Iris slid off the chair and walked to him. "Can we really go home now?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, now we can." As they turned toward the exit, Mila called after him. "We'll need you back tomorrow." He didn't look back. Tomorrow's fine. The crisis had ended, but the rebuilding had just begun. And this time, it would be built right. They had barely reached the control room doorway when a sharp ping cut through the steady hum. Not an alarm, worse. A warning. Mila's eyes snapped back to her tablet. "Hold on." He stopped immediately. "What is it?" Varelli asked, tension flashing back into her posture. "Load variance in Sector 9, Mila said. "It's minor, but it shouldn't exist. Not after full calibration." He turned slowly, instincts re-engaging. "Show me." The screen displayed a thin amber fluctuation line. Small, irregular, but persistent. "That sector feeds the older tunnel branches," he said quietly. "If there's variance, it means resistance in the reintegrated line." "Resistance," one engineer echoed. "Corrosion, or heat damage from the overload." Mila zoomed in. "Temperature readings are slightly elevated." Varelli's composure tightened again. "Is this another failure?" "No," he answered calmly. "It's a stress echo." He stepped back to the console. When Hub 3 spiked earlier, I had sent heat down auxiliary lines that haven't carried full load in years. The recalibration stabilized flow, but the metal's still adjusting. Mila frowned. If resistance increases, it won't cascade, he assured, but it could trip automated safety again. The room grew still. He reached for the console and began typing, fingers steady. "What are you doing?" Mila asked. "Installing a temporary buffer threshold," he replied. "We'll widen tolerance parameters for Sector 9 while monitoring heat dissipation." "That's safe?" Varelli pressed. "Yes, because now the system understands its own architecture." He glanced at Iris, who sat quietly swinging her legs. This was the difference. Earlier, the system had been blind to its own backup paths. Now it recognized them. He adjusted the threshold margin. "Variance decreasing," Mila reported. "Heat normalizing." The amber line softened toward green. He didn't relax yet. "Deploying diagnostic sweep across all legacy branches," he continued. "If there's microfracturing from thermal expansion, we flag it tonight." An engineer stared at him. "You're running a full structural integrity check?" "Yes. That could take hours." "It will," he said. Varelli stepped closer. "Then you're not leaving." He gave a faint smile. "I never said I was." Iris tilted her head. "Daddy, you said we could go home." He knelt beside her. "We will. Just a little longer." She nodded solemnly. The diagnostic sweep began. Green pulses flowing across the map like slow-moving constellations. Each branch lit up in sequence. Mila crossed her arms, watching the progress bar inch forward. "I've worked here 6 years," she said quietly. "No one's ever run a sweep like this." "That's because it wasn't considered urgent," he replied. "And now it's necessary." Varelli stood silent, absorbing every word. The first diagnostic report returned clean, then the second, then the third. "Sector 9 normalized," Mila confirmed. "All legacy branches reporting stable." He leaned back slightly from the console. "Good." The room's tension eased again, but this time it wasn't panic fading. It was confidence settling. An engineer spoke carefully. "You built safeguards into this system we didn't even know existed." "They weren't secrets," he answered. "They were just overlooked." Varelli inhaled slowly. "That won't happen again." He studied her for a long second. "I'll hold you to that." She didn't flinch. Outside the control room windows, the city skyline glowed through the night, trains beginning to move again, slowly, cautiously. Mila's tablet chimed one final time. "All systems green," she said softly. "No amber, no red, just green." He finally stepped away from the console completely. The crisis had not only been resolved, it had been reinforced against itself. And now, for the first time that night, there was nothing left trying to break. The control room settled into a low, confident hum, screens glowing steady green, engineers moving with deliberate calm instead of frantic motion. Outside the wide windows, a train slid cautiously out of the station below, headlights cutting through the dark like proof that the city still functioned. Mila lowered her tablet slowly. All diagnostic sweeps complete. No structural anomalies. Automation fully integrated. He nodded once. "Good. Keep monitoring Sector 9 through the night. Thermal normalization should finish within an hour." An engineer nearby gave him a look that wasn't skepticism anymore. It was respect. "You just rewrote our failure response protocol." He didn't respond to that. He was already kneeling beside Iris again. "You did great," he told her softly. She shrugged in that small, brave way children do when they don't want to admit they were scared. It was loud. "I know." Commissioner Varelli stood a few steps away, watching them with something heavier than gratitude. Cameras had been allowed up to the control floor now. Reporters hovered discreetly near the doorway, sensing the moment had shifted from emergency to reckoning. One of them stepped forward. "Commissioner, will there be changes to leadership oversight after tonight?" The question hung sharp in the air. Varelli didn't deflect. "Yes," she said clearly, "there will." "And Mr. Ardent's involvement moving forward?" She turned slightly toward him, but this time she didn't step aside or elevate theatrically. She simply answered truthfully. "He will serve as Senior Systems Advisor effective immediately," she said, "with direct authority over infrastructure safety compliance." The room reacted in murmurs. He straightened slowly. "Authority isn't the point," he said evenly. "Implementation is." "Then you'll have both," she replied. A reporter aimed a camera closer. "Mr. Ardent, how does it feel to go from being escorted out to being reinstated at the top?" He held the gaze without defensiveness. "It feels like systems don't care about appearances." There was no bitterness in his voice, just fact. Mila stepped in, speaking more firmly than before. Without him, ventilation failure would have turned critical in under 10 minutes. That wasn't exaggeration. The logs proved it. Varelli faced the cameras fully now. "Tonight exposed a weakness in our leadership decisions. That responsibility is mine." The admission silenced the room. "I deferred safety calibration for budget allocation," she continued. "That will not happen again." He watched her carefully. Not because he doubted the words, but because follow-through mattered more than confession. Iris tugged at his sleeve again. "Daddy, are we famous?" A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "No," he said gently, "we're just tired." A few reporters chuckled softly. The tension had shifted from survival to humility. Outside, the public address system updated once more. "Train services resuming gradually. Thank you for your patience." The voice was automated again, but steady. Mila glanced at him. "Control is stable. We can maintain from here." He finally felt the weight of exhaustion press into his shoulders. Varelli approached him one last time before the press fully reclaimed the narrative. "You saved my daughter," she said quietly. He shook his head. "I stabilized airflow." "She was on that train." He didn't answer that. There was nothing to gain from acknowledgement. "Tomorrow," she added, "we begin a full audit." "I'll be there," he replied. She hesitated, then extended her hand. He looked at it for a fraction of a second before taking it. The handshake wasn't dramatic. It wasn't triumphant. It was balanced. Around them, the cameras captured the image. Maintenance boots and executive heels standing on equal ground. The building behind them humming steady. No alarms, no flicker. Just a city functioning again. He lifted Iris into his arms and finally turned toward the exit. The crisis had forced recognition. The work ahead would demand consistency. And for the first time that night, the air felt clean. They stepped out of the control room and into the executive corridor, where the lighting no longer flickered and the hum of stabilized systems felt almost gentle. Down in the lobby, reporters were already broadcasting live summaries, looping footage of alarms, and then, the moment the emergency broadcast shifted to a calm, human voice. His voice. Iris rested her head against his shoulder as he walked. Fatigue had softened her earlier tension, but she still held the strap of her inhaler bag like it was sacred. Elevator doors opened with a quiet chime. Inside, mirrored walls reflected 3 versions of them: maintenance worker, commissioner, child, no longer separated by status, only by responsibility. When they reached the lobby, the crowd parted more respectfully than before. No one reached for his arm this time. No one mistook him for a liability. A senior board member pushed through the cluster of donors, face flushed. "Commissioner, this could have been catastrophic," he said sharply. "Deferred calibration? Who approved that?" "I did," Varelli answered without hesitation. The board member blinked. "For expansion capital?" "Yes." He studied her, expecting deflection. There was none. "And him?" the board member demanded, gesturing toward Caleb. "Why wasn't he retained?" Varelli's jaw tightened slightly. "Because I allowed short-term optics to outweigh long-term safety." The words landed heavy. Cameras recorded every syllable. He shifted Iris slightly in his arms, not seeking vindication, not savoring reversal, just holding his ground. The board member turned toward him. "Mr. Ardent, is that accurate?" He met the man's gaze evenly. "I resigned when calibration authority was deferred." "You resigned?" the board member echoed. "Yes." The board member looked back at Varelli, anger flickering across his face. "You let the architect walk." Silence pooled in the lobby. Varelli didn't argue. "Yes." That admission changed the air more than any alarm had. A reporter stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Ardent, what would have happened if manual reroute hadn't been performed?" He didn't dramatize it. Carbon dioxide levels in Tunnel 6 would have crossed critical within minutes. Secondary tunnels would have followed. Emergency evacuation in stalled trains without ventilation carries significant risk. Gasps moved through the onlookers. "And tonight," the reporter pressed, "you were escorted out of this building." He held the memory lightly. Earlier perceptions don't alter engineering realities. The line traveled quickly through the crowd, not sharp but undeniable. Varelli straightened fully now, no longer defensive but resolute. "Effective immediately," she announced, projecting clearly. "All deferred infrastructure protocols will undergo immediate review. Mr. Ardent will oversee recalibration implementation." The board member nodded slowly. Agreed. There it was. Not applause, not spectacle, institutional correction. Iris stirred against him. "Daddy, can we go get hot chocolate?" A few people smiled despite themselves. He allowed himself a faint chuckle. "Yeah, we can." Mila approached from the control floor stairwell, breathless but smiling. "Final confirmation. Full grid stable, no regression." He nodded. "Good work." "You too," she said softly. Security personnel now moved through the lobby, assisting stranded passengers, directing them calmly toward reopened platforms. The earlier sneers were gone. Some even offered him quiet nods of respect as they passed. The building that had rejected him hours earlier now seemed to stand because of him. The board member stepped closer one last time. "You'll have full authority over safety compliance," he said firmly. "No budget interference." He studied the man carefully. Authority means nothing without enforcement. "It'll have enforcement," the board member assured. He gave a single nod. Varelli met his eyes again. "I was wrong." It wasn't whispered. It wasn't dramatic. It was direct. He held her gaze for a long moment before answering. "Then fix it." She nodded once, and that was enough. They stepped out of the terminal into a night that felt strangely quiet after hours of alarms and metal strain. Snow had begun to fall, thin, hesitant flakes catching in the glow of streetlights. The city moved again behind them, trains gliding carefully along restored tracks, ventilation systems breathing in steady rhythm. Iris tilted her face toward the sky. "It's cold," she said, smiling anyway. He adjusted her scarf gently. "Cold means the air's clear." Behind them, reporters lingered near the entrance, finishing live segments. Inside, Board members were already drafting emergency revisions. Control room lights remained on, diagnostic monitors still glowing, but stable. Commissioner Varelli stood just inside the glass doors, watching as father and daughter crossed toward the parking lot. Not with superiority, not with pity, with respect. He reached his old sedan and opened the passenger door for Iris. She climbed in, hugging her stuffed fox tightly. "Hot chocolate first," she reminded him. "Hot chocolate first," he agreed. Before he closed the door, he paused and looked back once at the terminal. Earlier that night, he had been pushed out of those doors as a liability. Now, the building stood because he had stepped back inside. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt responsible. He slid into the driver's seat and rested his hands on the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. The silence inside the car was softer than any applause. Iris leaned back. "Daddy?" "Yeah? Are they going to be nicer now?" He considered that. "Maybe," he said gently, "but it doesn't matter." "Why?" "Because we know who we are." She nodded, satisfied. Across the street, a group of commuters who had witnessed everything earlier waved shyly. One man raised a coffee cup in quiet salute. A woman mouthed "thank you" through the glass. He returned a small nod. Respect didn't need microphones. The engine turned over smoothly. Warm air began filling the cabin, steady and reliable. Inside the terminal, reforms were already beginning. Deferred calibrations were being reviewed. Redundant systems were being logged properly. Authority was shifting from optics to oversight, not because someone shouted, because someone proved. As he pulled away from the curb, the emergency broadcast system inside the station ran one final update. "All services restored. Thank you for your patience." No one would know how close it had come to catastrophe unless they had been there. But those who had would remember. They would remember the maintenance worker who understood the building better than the executives who managed it. They would remember the moment automated panic was replaced by a steady human voice. They would remember that dignity doesn't wear a uniform. Snow thickened slightly as they drove toward a small diner glowing warm at the corner. Iris pressed her palm against the window, tracing a line through the frost. "You always fix stuff," she murmured sleepily. He smiled faintly. "Not everything, but enough. If this story meant something to you, ask me for the next story title, and let's tell another one that matters. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Everyone thought the single dad was homeless. The emergency broadcast proved them wrong. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?